Hi everyone. So for this week's forum, the area I chose to study was the northeastern portion of Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. So a quick geography lesson for those who aren't familiar with the state. In the east, you have Philadelphia, which is famously located on the Delaware River. In the middle of the state, you have Harrisburg, the state capital, which is on the Susquehanna River. And in the west, you have Pittsburgh, which rests on the convergence of the Monongahela, Ohio, and Allegheny rivers. The Allegheny comes north from Freshwater Springs, crosses into New York, and then back down south, and then back down to Pittsburgh. So most of the northern portion of the state is actually some form of state park, state game lands, a national forest, or just state forest. And about half the state in the center is taken up by the Appalachian Mountains. So the area I chose to study in the northeastern portion is kind of a combination of Appalachian Mountains and state forest along the Allegheny River before it flows south to Pittsburgh. So since I grew up near the Susquehanna, I wanted to research a different portion of the state since I was pretty familiar with that area. And I chose to do the Allegheny region because I wasn't familiar with anything that it had to offer. So what I found basically was that dams are kind of double-edged swords. In some places, they provide a valuable source of hydropower and are used to assist in irrigation for farmland. On the Allegheny and its tributaries, however, the dams are mostly used for flood control, and on the main river especially, it's used for navigation farther upstream for commerce, mostly recreation occasionally. Typically, I found that we seem to think that dams are big bad monsters preventing fish from moving upstream. However, what I found in northeastern Pennsylvania kind of changed my opinion of that a little bit. So most of the species that reside in the Allegheny are freshwater lake or river dwellers like muskie or trout. And the rivers aren't especially fast flowing. They're kind of slow moving. So the fish there are actually able to kind of live in both environments. And sediment control hasn't really been too much of an issue for aquatic health up there because the dams, part of what they do is release water and sediment routinely, which kind of helps out the fish species a great deal. So on the Allegheny, there's a series of 9 locks on the main river, and I thought for sure this would hinder the fish from moving upstream since they can't be contained within 2 locks. But what I found was that the State and Boat Commission had done extensive studies and found that the fish were able to actually go into the locks since they were only a few feet high and only sets of 2, and move through the rivers upstream with relative ease. And as long as the engineers were practicing the proper lock operations, there really wasn't an issue as far as migrating fish upstream. So, but that isn't to say there isn't a few big dams on the Allegheny that affect migrating species, but on the whole, the fish populations are actually pretty healthy, and using a catch and release system instead of just outright sport fishing, because there's not too much commercial fishing out there, the fish populations were pretty sustainable. And then the only main controversy I could really find was on the Kinzua Dam, which is pretty far north, which was used mostly for flood control. It's about 30 feet high, made of concrete, but basically it saved the state almost $1.2 billion in flood damages from various tropical storms that make their way up the coast and through the eastern seaboard. So it's kind of hard to ignore benefits like that, and also the recreational benefits and money that comes into the state when the fish populations are still pretty healthy. Yeah, it affects the migrating fish species a little bit, but overall, benefits are too great to ignore, so that's why the dam's never been really subject to a lot of controversy in removing. The state's done a really good job also at identifying dams that hold no value. So old abandoned dams that used to be used for sawmills or whatnot, they've identified, looked at the species and said, hey, we need to remove these, and they have. So on the Conewango River, which is a tributary to the Allegheny, pretty kind of near the Kinzua Dam, a little bit farther south, the scientists found that it was actually a honeypot for freshwater mussels. So within about a year, the American rivers group decided to help fund the removal, dams were removed and freshwater mussels and fish populations moved upstream. So here's the bottom line that I found. Not all dams are bad. They're important for revenue in some instances, and each dam should be evaluated and reevaluated over the years to what benefits they have. So as far as northeastern Pennsylvania goes, they've been doing it, and they're doing a pretty good job. So I think they got the right idea. Thank you, and I hope this has been a little bit educational for you.